Hi guys, today is the 2nd of January 2021. It's 44 minutes past 1 in the afternoon over here in the UK. The US military says Iran is sending arms and troops to Venezuela. This report was published on December the 2nd, 2020. It says Iran is supporting embattled Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro's government with weapons and troops. A US military official told the Wall Street Journal Wednesday, bolstering suspicions that the two governments, which have been roiled by economic and political pressure from the United States, are developing stronger military ties. So, with all the escalation between the United States and Iran over the last couple of days, because the anniversary of the killing of Qasem Soleimani is coming up tomorrow on January the 3rd, the United States is sending B-52 bombers over there to deter any action from Iran. Iran is bolstering up its naval activity. All sorts of things are happening. So it's clear that there could be an attack by either side in the next coming days. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but the potential is there, even more so now than it was, say, a year ago. We've been looking at these things for a long time, so I can understand if some people are kind of tired of looking at it, but this is life and death for a lot of people if these things start to occur. So that's why it's important that we stick with it. For me, at least until the end of the Trump administration on January the 20th, the reason being is that Trump is featured so heavily in the video, not directly, but indirectly. And, the suggestion is that all these things occur while he's in power. So if he leaves on January the 20th, as is expected, then that kind of puts this whole interpretation thing into a different light. For me, I won't be continuing. But if he stays, then that's a different matter. We won't be addressing that in this video. What we will be addressing is a different potential that I have kind of looked at before, but I'm going to explain it in a slightly different way. This structure here, what looks like a hand with a finger pointing out to another finger, is reminiscent of that painting. I can't remember in which chapel, cathedral, or church it's in. Like Italy. My mind's drawing a blank because I just want to focus on what I was going to say. But either way, it's kind of like the hand of God reaching out to man. There being a gap between man not really reaching as far as God is reaching for man. So, just putting that aside, this structure, I believe, represents a place in the world. I've often interpreted this place as the Strait of Hormuz, and this iceberg, which we kind of agree is like a representation of an aircraft carrier coming forward to block what we would say is the Strait of Hormuz, leading to, unstable oil supply and turmoil in the world. But looking at the map of the world, when I look at the Strait of Hormuz, which is this gap here, it doesn't really resemble what's in the iPad Go-To video. It's sort of like a finger extending out, but it's more like a mountain extending out. There's another place in the world which represents this shape much better in my interpretation, so I'm just going to quickly go there. It's over in the Gulf of Mexico, and it's the space between Mexico and Cuba. Why am I way over here? I didn't focus. Sorry. So here we are, between Cuba and Mexico. You see how, let me zoom out a little bit. You see how this section underneath, kind of like a crab claw, sort of like a claw, underneath here, to me, sort of represents this underneath area here. And in this part of the structure, which extends out like a finger, resembles this part of Cuba, which extends out like a finger. Now, going with that theory, the suggestion here would be that Iran, or whoever, is moving towards the Gulf of Mexico. Now, you notice how this little piece of structure just here is directly underneath, let's say, the tip of the finger and diagonal to the underpart. This part of the island here, sort of directly under the finger and diagonal to the underpart. So I think that what we're seeing here is a representation of Cuba and the gap going into the Gulf of Mexico. say, going towards, because this aircraft carrier, shall we say, is moving towards this little island and moving towards the bottom part of the finger, which is Cuba. So here, that would mean it's approaching from this side, coming towards the Gulf of Mexico. So, going with that theory, I'm going to let the video play a little bit, because I believe it kind of tells a story. When Osama bin Laden's raising up his hands, I believe there's a suggestion of maybe three things. Fire moving upwards with representation of his beard and the smoke that surrounds. A tsunami wave, which the smoke also represents. And missiles rising up with the pointed figures in the background. Let the video play a little bit more. We then come to this scene here, where we see what appears to be a lightning strike, but could be just a suggestion of an explosion, or the triggering of an explosion. We see the Earth lifted up from this explosion underneath, and above is the tsunami wave. In that tsunami wave, I've shown before, there's a submarine, you can see just there in black, what looks like a ship, maybe a smaller ship there. The explosion is a bit more clearer here. You can see the section of Earth. There appears to be something in the Earth just here, but I'm not going to address that in this video here. The Earth appears to be cracking. If we go with J.K. Blackout's interpretation for this structure here, then this would be a representation of Florida. So going back to the map, that would suggest an earthquake perhaps in the Gulf of Mexico, an earthquake and explosion perhaps in the Gulf of Mexico, causing an earthquake or the earth to fracture, affecting Florida. I won't say the fracture would go all the way to Florida, but you know, there's a indication that Florida is affected by it. And then as the scene plays, you see the lighting up here, and then we move on to New York, where you see the light traveling towards the Statue of Liberty. The Statue of Liberty lights up, and then you see the light go out just above. I believe what all of that is saying is a missile launch, or missile launches from the Gulf of Mexico, and that's why we see the scene light up in what would be the Gulf of Mexico. Let me just go back a second. If the background suggests the Gulf of Mexico with the oil ridge representing Texas, and we go with J.K. Blackout's theory of this representing Florida, then that would put us in the Gulf of Mexico. The scene lighting up, as I said, would suggest a missile launch, and that missile launch would travel over Florida towards New York. That would put it going this way, traveling along the East Coast. And remember, from my earlier videos, I've interpreted that the outline of Virginia, it's so difficult for me to find these places now, here we go. The outline of not Virginia, Delaware, New Jersey, this whole area here represents the old lady in the tower with the long nose extending outwards, looking out towards the ocean. Now, in her part of the scene, which I'll probably show you in a minute, you see a light in her eyes travel across and then explode. Now, where she is not far from New York. So it is all suggesting that a missile or missiles travel along the East Coast towards New York and detonate above, which is what appears to be happening here. This causes the lights to go out. So the suggestion is it generates an EMP, which would suggest that the missile itself is nuclear in nature. Now, with all of that said, at the same time, we have what appears to be a cyclonic weather pattern going on here. And it just so happens that we also have a winter storm bringing snow and freezing rain and ice across the Midwest to the eastern side of the United States, down into the northeast. So again, we have something that brings the correct weather pattern to the whole scenario. And we have the tensions between Iran and the United States making this whole scenario from here, where I believe we're approaching the Gulf of Mexico into the Gulf of Mexico, where we have a missile launch, a possible tsunami from an underground explosion, generating an earthquake affecting Florida, affecting the oil in that region. The missile launch travels along the east coast up to the New York, detonating above, causing the EMP, turning the lights out. That's just one theory, just put like that. Now, in this scene here, I believe we're being told the same thing, just in a slightly different way. George Bush is from Texas, so it puts us in the Gulf of Mexico region, and his head starts spinning around in a cyclonic pattern, just like the winter storm that's coming from the Midwest or the Mideast, floating through to the East Coast up to the Northeast, obviously where New York is. Then we see the underground explosion. Again, that would link into the theory of there being an underground explosion or underwater explosion in the Gulf of Mexico. The tsunami wave pushing across, perhaps towards Florida. Again, I'm just going to go back a second. He's pointing at Florida and the submarine before he starts all of these motions. Circular, underwater, tsunami, and then the missile launch, something going above his head, not hitting where he is. Now the suggestion is that this is Florida, although George Bush himself represents Texas, where he was on 9/11 was in Florida. So that's what we're looking out for. An event perhaps going over Florida. Again, that ties in with the missile theory from the Gulf of Mexico, over Florida, down the East Coast, past Delaware, Virginia, up to New York, where it then detonates and causes a blackout. Now, before I go on to the old lady, if that all ties in, as I said, escape from here. In this scene, we have a submarine which appears to be in the Gulf of Mexico, the representation of Florida, the representation of Texas. George Bush represents Texas, where he is in the school, represents Florida. He's doing his arms upwards in an underground sort of explosion and tsunami wave. We have an underground explosion and a tsunami wave. The shark on the board represents the submarine, so we have that just here, the shark on the board representing the submarine. Now, as I've said before in early interpretations, the house appears to represent a nuclear missile with the numbers 1 and 3 attached to it. We have N and Y. We've got a New Year 31st reference. That's gone. Nothing like that happened. But we also have a New York, Manhattan, January the 3rd reference. Now that is tomorrow, and obviously we need to keep watch for anything like that potentially happening. Of course, there's also the 13th, where this could happen, and as long as Donald Trump leaves the White House on January the 20th, that would be the last interpretation for these numbers 1 and 3 that could occur within his presidency. Well, there's a lot going on. That's all I can really say. The interpretations seem to flow, they link in together, and it tells a story, but whether that story is going to unfold in the real world is another matter entirely. We do have the potential for it happening, the escalations between the United States and Iran, the reports of Iran sending weapons and arms are the same thing, weapons and military to Venezuela, which is much closer to the United States. From there, if we follow that story, we could have a submarine or naval ships or whatever somehow make its way into the Gulf of Mexico, past Cuba and Mexico, just as it appears to be in the I Get Goat 2 video. And then we could have the events unfold, just as I've said. Something in the Gulf of Mexico exploding, affecting the oil. Texas and the Gulf of Mexico are very well known for oil, and if something was to happen there, it would affect the oil supply. Not just that, but if at the same time Iran blocked the Strait of Hormuz, then we've got a real crisis on our hands. I'm going to stop there. Actually, before I stop there, I just wanted to refer to the old lady, as I said I would. Just remembered. So, for those of you who haven't seen, it's just the way that they've drawn this old lady's nose, really emphasizing it in the video. And when you look at the map, it may not be the case, but when I look at the map, I see her right there, her long nose extending outwards, just in that region, just below New York. And then what we see in her eye is that little white light travel past her. It travels across that way. So if she's Virginia looking out this way, she's Virginia looking out this way, the light travels past her this way and explodes. And it appears that it could be a reference to the area of New York. And again, perhaps to re-emphasize where that explosion came from, behind her, drawn in the tsunami wave, is what appears to be a shark, again representing a submarine, although this one has all the marks of the number 5 on it. So again, you can look at the 5th of January for these things. Personally, I'm looking out for the events with Donald Trump and China and things like that. But again, who knows what could happen. You guys, I hope none of it happens. I pray none of it happens. You guys have a good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and may the Heavenly Father bless you.